I appreciate you doing this, by the way.
Oh, my pleasure. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Maine Take. My name is Dana Connors. I am pleased to be the host of a program brought to you by the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. And if you've watched our show in the past, you know it's having a guest on to talk about some of the issues, the ideas, initiatives going on in our state to help improve people's lives as well as their livelihood, and most of all, to move our economy forward in these very trying times. Well, I'm pleased to say that today's guest is somebody trying to do that very thing. He is the independent on this year's ballot for who will be the next governor. Will it be Paula Page coming back after one-term hiatus to serve the state? Will it be Janet Mills to finish out her second term, four-year term? Or will it be our guest today, the independent Sam Hunkler, who is trying to gain some traction as we approach a week from today, on November the 8th, the election day, for this very important question. Dr. Hunkler, Sam, as I reference you in so many of our previous conversations I've had, it's been a real pleasure. And it's also a pleasure to have you on with us today. It means a lot to me personally, as well as the chamber.
Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, you have a very impressive background, and I want to spend just a couple of minutes setting it up before we get into the real questions surrounding you and some of your policy positions. You are the 8th of 9 children. You grew up on a farm in Ohio. You felt for a long time you were destined to be a doctor, which you became, but before you started that path forward, you went to the Peace Corps. You were there in Kenya, and while there, met your future life, who happened to be from Maine, which is good fortune on our part, and I guess yours as well. But you also, before you became a doctor, you have been a teacher, you've been a counselor, you've been a carpenter, you have served in the National Health Service, a nonprofit director, a father of 4, and now you're the independent for governor. Very impressive career of public service. I give that to you. So let's begin with the basic question. You're well known in the Beals area, and for those patients that you've helped deal with their physical issues. What motivated you to make a run for governor of the state of Maine?
Well, it's been a long time coming, actually, but I think it's our political system in this country more so than the state, but also in the state, and I see how divided we've become and how divisive things have become, and I'm almost embarrassed to show the children of today what our world looks like, what our political landscape looks like, because they have no perspective of how it was 50 years ago or 40 years ago. And so they're coming in and it just seems to be so divided, so divisive. And I said, I've always kind of wanted to serve the greater good. And so I said, well, I'm either going to jump in and try to make a difference, or I'm just going to jump out because I'm so disgusted with it. And so here I am, I've jumped in. And I told myself I can always jump out or drop out later. But so here I am. I've jumped in to see if I can bring a different perspective to the arena, because I think that most of us are wanting something different. We're tired of the way things are in our political system, and they're wanting something different, just like I am. But they don't exactly know what that looks like.
Yeah.
And so that's what I'm offering. I'm offering a glimpse of what at least how I see it. And that's and that, I use my slogan is let's find common ground, using common sense for the common good. Now that's a pie in the sky idea, but I believe that's where we have to head in that direction.
Yeah, was there any event? I mean, you did very, very aptly describe that it has been something that's been in your mind for some time, that you're frustrated with what you see out there and what's going on, particularly as it relates to our younger people, which is a very important point for sure. Was there an event, or was there something that turned that switch that said, you know what, now's the time I'm going to do it? I'm semi-retired and I want to take this issue on.
Well, I think that my retirement. I mean, at the end of last year, I had planned to retire. I was going to be 65. I have to get board certified in family medicine every 10 years. That board certification was ending in the last year, so I said this looks like a good time to do that.
Yeah.
And then it just happened to be that the governor race came about, and I believe that I have, from my experiences that you've talked about, I think I have a little wider view of people and life and just experiences. And so I felt like but being the governor would be a doable thing, because I believe that I have the vision, I have the peripheral vision to be able to come in and give a different perspective and do it differently. It's interesting that my little sidestep, my father, when I was in high school, I was the eighth of nine kids you mentioned, and at one point he said, Sam, I don't care what you do for the rest of your life. You can go out and pick apples if that's what you want to do. Just be able to support yourself and your family. I said, well, great. He had no expectation of me. But then when I was in college, I was home for a weekend, and my friends were out in the car in the dooryard, and I was going out the door, and he looked at me and said, Sam, have you ever thought about getting into politics? And it's interesting that But it's interesting that I never got around to asking him why he asked me that, because he died a few years later, and I just wasn't on my radar. And so I didn't ask him. But so that always stuck in the back of my mind as part of this. But I think the other thing that really kind of motivated me is that I saw actually the effect that one man had on the whole world and our country, and that would be Donald Trump. He had such an impact in the world. And I said, wow, look at the impact that one person can have in this world. And so I looked at it as like, okay, well, maybe we can make that impact in a different way. Maybe more about fairness and kindness and respect and compassion. And maybe we can go down that road to see if we can make a difference. And because I think it's really what we need to come together.
Sam, I can tell you what your friend saw in you that you may not have seen yourself is that very sensitivity that clearly comes through when you speak. And that's a gift that not everybody has, but you obviously do. Let's talk a bit about this. Your candidacy, not to put you down in any respect. It was a tall order to be able to be successful without a party. Not that independents haven't done it before you. That's not the issue. But you come from Beals, and if you've been to Beals, you love Beals. You live there, and I don't know that you've lived there for 30 years, but you lived in Maine for 30 years, and a good part of it's been at Beals. But you came almost from obscurity from a statewide perspective. And with the week to go, I guess we would consider you a long shot in terms of your chances, but you've learned something along this journey. What is your takeaway where you stand right today? We're not giving up on you, but where we stand today with a week to go, you've walked the state, you've done a lot of one-person campaigning. What have you learned along the way?
Well, the first thing is what I mentioned earlier, is that everybody's looking for something different. They just don't know what that looks like. But we're all wanting just some, we want a fresh slate. We want a breath of fresh air to come in and kind of blow things, the old, the dregs away. But the other thing that I've learned being out there on the street is I think there's about 20% on the far right. And I think it's about the same amount on the far left. And those people I couldn't have a conversation with. They couldn't listen. They couldn't, because they were so stuck in their paradigm and in their opinions that they couldn't listen. And there was no way I was going to find common ground with them. But there are the 60, and I think that they are the ones that get all the press, they make all the noise, and the press covers that. And so that's why it looks so divisive, mainly because of those factions. But I find that there's 60% in the middle, where there's 30% independents, and then there's some on the right and left. But I believe that those are the people that where we can find common ground, because we can sit down and we can disagree, but do it respectfully. But also, I believe that there's a way to find common ground, and I usually can do that. And so that's where my focus is in the 60%. Now, maybe if we find common ground in the middle, we can pull in these fringes, so the 20% on each side, that make it so divisive. And I believe that can happen. But those people have to see that it can work in a different way, that it doesn't have to be black and white, yes or no, good and bad. That's not really what we're about. Because again, I believe that we all do, and we have to find the things where we find common ground. And I can't imagine one thing that would be more pertinent in that area than children. We all want the best for children and their future. And so that just seems like a no-brainer that I really believe in. So, but when we get into some more divisive issues like abortion and gun control and climate change and vaccines and all that, it's going to be harder to find common ground there. But I think it can happen, but it's going to take time. It's going to take the fact that people see that there is a difference, that people can come together, they can work out these issues, that I think that we can maybe pull them in. But all this is going to take time. As you know, it may take the whole 4 years to start to implement some of these things, but it's really about going in a different direction.
Yeah. You know what?
I also got a very good perspective.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, one other perspective I had, which I think was very good. I got this from Eli Berry, and up at a Common Ground Fair. I was working my little stand with my signs and cards, and he was doing voter registration. And he said, when you're out on the ocean, you actually need 3 points of reference. If you just have two perspectives, you're not going anywhere. You can take a few steps in that direction, and you go through a few steps in this direction, but you're not going to go anywhere. You may end up going around in circles. So you need a third perspective to give some vision and a place where we're going. And I thought that was a great perspective. I think we need another perspective in there. It's not that perspective is any more important than the other two, but we need to find a place to give us direction, because I don't know where we're going. I don't know. I don't have a clear vision of where we're going.
Well, let's talk about your vision for a moment. And having had conversations with you, which I've always enjoyed, and reading things that you said or hearing you say it, I have found that the concept of community to you is extremely important. Do you want to speak to that in terms of giving our viewers a sense of why you say that and its priority as far as you see it?
Well, I think that you would agree with me that communities, especially rural communities, were real different 50 years ago. And there seemed to be much more of a community. But back then we didn't have social media. We didn't have, cell phones. We didn't have all the other distractions. But it seemed like people got together quite a bit more than they do. Even, I use examples with you about farmers. I mean, farmers have a community. And when one of their equipment breaks down, they have a neighbor they can go to. But even that, I think, has not been what it used to be. I mean, the Grange halls were that was a community. The Grange halls aren't used like they used to be 50 years ago. And so our communities have changed. And I do believe that in the concept that it takes a community to raise a child. And I would really like to see us get back to much more of a community-based way of living. I'll use Beals as an example. Well, first of all, I would tell you that what we need in Beals and our strengths and challenges are very different than what you need in Augusta or what you need in Portland. And so I really believe that the communities are where life happens, and it's where we need to strengthen them. And one thing I would love to see us do is make our schools the hub of the communities. Beals, that's where we have our town meetings. That's where we have the gatherings is at our school. And even though we've only got like 40 to 50 kids now, I mean, the population going down, but we've refused to consolidate because we know the importance of it. And I would love to start, for example, have daycare in schools. Start to build that community that way, and also have elderly come into schools for lunches. But then let's also have the children start to teach them themselves. If you have a sixth grader who can go down and teach a grader how to read, if they're struggling, and we have much more of a community in that way. Right now, we have all fifth graders together, one age group together. That's not very healthy in my way of thinking. So it's really about expanding that whole idea, even in schools, about what community is all about. And I think that does. So again, how that works in Beals is going to be very different than how that works in Portland. You have communities there. You have indigenous communities. You have communities based on where people have come from. It used to be, for example, in Munjoy Hill, you had a community. I don't know what ethnic group that was, but it was a big community that doesn't exist anymore. But we need to start building those communities, because I think that's where we can start making change from the bottom up.
Yeah, I well said. I want to talk a bit about some policy issues just to get that out in front of our viewers. Not looking for long answers, but some of them probably are going to be difficult to answer without some extended conversations. But let's talk about, you mentioned education and how important it is. Let's talk about the economy for a second, and the role and the impact that inflation has had on all of our lives. And if you were governor, even notwithstanding the fact that it's a national issue, it's not a lot a governor can do, but things like taxes, and I know you've established a position relevant to what your priorities in taxes would be. Share that with us.
Well, one of the things I see is happening. I mean, for example, even let's talk about the housing crisis that we're in right now. And Portland has a housing crisis, and Calais needs people, and they have a housing crisis because there's too many places for sale, and their population has gone down 50% in the last 10 years. So it's a different type of housing problem. So when you look at housing, for example, what has really made it so difficult for people in southern Maine in particular, or coastal areas, to buy housing is the fact that we've had such an influx of people from out of state. And a lot of those people are seasonal people. They come here, they find the prices very reasonable. It's not, they're coming from very high dollar, real estate areas. And so they come here and they buy the homes. And so what happens? The real estate prices go up. And not only that, but the taxes go up. I mean, the taxes here on Beals have tripled in the past, 15, 20 years. But if you take the people in Beals, most of them would not be able to afford the house they're in if they had to go and buy it. That's a huge problem. And yes, and if they could make money, by selling their house, at a much higher price than what they ever thought they'd ever get. But then where do they go? And so right. You start with housing and stable housing. And that, when my son says he thinks that's the issue of this campaign is housing, because, as when we were 20 years old and we had a job, we could go into a bank and get a loan for a house. All you need is a job, a steady income. That's not possible nowadays. So in order for us to grow our economy, we have to have affordable housing. If we want people to move here, to start working here, we need affordable housing. And so how do we do that? So here, and this is just one thing that I say, I would love to see us somehow greatly increase our homestead exemption for primary homes. I mean, even and that would depend on where you are and what that's all about. And every town would have a leeway maybe in how to do that. But then I would love to see us somehow increase taxes on seasonal homes, because I don't believe that our seasonal guests pay their fair share of taxes, because all of us pay income tax that helps our state exist. They don't. Most of their taxes are going to our schools. Yes, that's great. those people that in the schools there, they become some of them become front end workers, and they help to service our summer guests. But I don't believe that they pay their fair share. I would also like to extend that homestead exemption to rentals that house primary residents, so that maybe that would give the residents a rent break, so that we could decrease the rent. And again, those are just a couple of ideas but I think housing is a huge part of this whole economy.
Housing, and you also mentioned another one that really has impacted the workforce and the economy, which is childcare. And you mentioned it earlier when we talked about our educational system being opened up for childcare. That's important. I also read, I believe I'm correct on this, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that you reminded me when you talked about the seasonal visitors that have homes here on the coast, that in one article I read where you would propose that there be a gas tax increase in the high season. Correct me if I'm wrong on that, or am I talking the right thread of information?
Well, yes. Again, we have how many million of people come here in the summertime, from maybe the beginning of June till the end of October, and I say, well, an idea would be, okay, I want them to help support our infrastructure, to support our natural environment, and so I would like to propose that we do increase our fuel tax during the summertime when we have all these visitors, and then decrease it in the wintertime by the same amount. So all of us who are going around to high school basketball games or whatever we're doing in the wintertime, we pay less. So overall, the citizens of Maine would hopefully pay the same amount for their fuel, their gasoline, but we would be able to get more money from our guests. Again, I'm just asking them to help us out, to help. They come here because they love Maine, and so we need help to maintain what we're doing. And so that's all I'm doing. I'm asking them. I'm not trying to penalize them. I just want them to help us out because we need their help.
Let's move to another issue. We all know that Beals is down east, and fishing, lobstering is extremely important industry to not only the region, but to the state of Maine. Its impact is incredibly significant. Give me your position on the current position we find ourselves in. That's almost like you're deciding between the renewable offshore wind versus the lobster industry. We happen to be ones that say, is it possible to have both? What's your opinion on that issue? You're very close to it.
Well, first of all, there's a lot of ocean out there, and I think that both can coexist. When I look at the federal mandates that come down to the fishermen, I don't think they understand the fact that the majority of fishermen don't fish anywhere near where the right whale comes. If they're in state water with 3 miles into the coast, the whales never come in that far. And so the only fishermen that could possibly come in contact with those whales are the ones fishing in federal waters. So if we're doing any kind of federal mandates and changing of fishing gear, whatever, it should only affect them, but people don't realize that. So I think that's just one thing that I would love to go to Washington and sit down and talk to people, because I don't think they understand. I mean, when you're fishing in these bays and inlets, there's no way that you're ever going to entangle a whale. But at the same time, I don't want to see whales killed. And I don't want to see whales with fishing gear wrapped around them. And I think the other thing we really need to do is they're talking about putting GPS systems. Why say, let's monitor the whales and know where they are at all times? We have the ability to do that. We've got all these satellites up there. We can follow those whales anywhere they go. And if they're getting near fishing gear, maybe then you can drop your line and put something on it where you can, bring it back up. So there's lots of ways we can go about that. I don't think we need to start looking outside the box a little bit for that. But I certainly support the fishermen. My son's out there, in federal waters as we speak. He's fishing. So and it's a way of life, and I certainly want to do whatever we can to preserve that.
Let's move to another issue that is front and center these days, and that's, well, before I get to that point, let me ask this. As a doctor, if you'd have been in the position when the pandemic hit us in March of 2020, how would you have handled that period of time that we've all been in? Yes, it showed Maine in many ways that had that community spirit that you spoke of a while ago, in which we looked out for each other, we worked hard to protect one another. How would you have handled it? Would you have handled it differently than the administration did?
Well, I would have handled it differently a couple of ways, but I'll start by saying, I said when this whole started and the vaccine came out, I said, we're not going to know what effect this had on the population for another 5 years. We're not going to know what negative effects it may have, how effective it was. And now we're up to what number, booster number 5, I think, at this point. And so I still think the data is still coming in. But that's an approach I use toward any new pharmaceutical that comes out. I typically don't use it for the first 5 years because I want to see what it's going to do out here in the population. You know, all these studies are done by the drug companies, and and I have some issues with how the big pharma goes about this whole process. So I always would wait for 5 years, unless there was somebody who came in requesting it and it seemed reasonable. I wouldn't use it. So it's the same thing with this vaccine. So I would not have mandated vaccines. I would not have done that. I think that I'm kind of libertarian in that way. I believe in body autonomy. I don't believe that the government should have any authority over my body and the choices I make, whether that's LGBTQ or abortions or vaccines. I think I believe in that body autonomy. So that from that point, but I think that we certainly needed to have recommendations and guidelines. But again, what was needed in Portland was very different than what we needed in Beals. I mean, we didn't have a case up and down this way for probably 10 or 12 months after it happened in Portland. And we have because we're a small community, I think that we controlled it much better. I mean, even though a lot of people here didn't get vaccines, but if you are, and that's what I say, if you want a vaccine, you could get one. But getting a vaccine didn't necessarily mean you weren't going to spread it. Doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get the COVID. So I would have approached it that way. And again, more so as I believe a liberty issue, a freedom issue that is for me to decide what to do and not the government.
Well, you've kind of answered the other question I was going to ask you, but you answered it when you provided the previous statement about the fishing versus offshore wind, and that's abortion. I mean, it sounded to me like for the same reason you would leave it up to the mother and her physician. Did I characterize that correctly?
That is correct. And I say, abortion is a very, very unfortunate issue in our society that's there. And it would be nice to get to a place in our society where it's not needed, where we have the means where a woman only gets pregnant when they want to. We got to figure out how to get men in that equation, because that's part of the issue, is men being involved with that. It would be nice if anybody who got pregnant and decided they didn't want their child, if they really wanted to give it for adoption, that they are totally supported in that, financially, mentally, spiritually, socially. And so, but we're a long way from that, I think, at this point. And so all we do by making it illegal is we put women's lives at risk.
Yeah.
And it's gone on for thousands of years, and it's going to continue to go on for thousands of years, or it's going to continue to go on, whether it's legal or illegal. And so I'm not willing to put women's lives at risk. And we all heard horror stories about what women do to have abortions, in the past. So I do support the current statute in the Maine Constitution about abortion, and I would entertain changing that if I get 2/3 of the legislature or 2/3 of people by referendum coming with wanting something different. I would certainly go along with that.
Sam, it's been absolutely delightful, and I've continued it a bit beyond the half hour because I want to ask you this question before I close it out with my thoughts about our interview today and where you stand. And that is, there's a lot of other issues we could speak to, and I'm pleased that to be able to give you this opportunity because a lot of the things that you said really will be supported by a whole lot of people, I'm sure, if they get a chance to see it, to hear you, and to know what you stand for. Like you said, stand with Sam2022.com, which is where people can get information. But in the interest of time, is there an issue or a topic or a policy that I didn't ask you that you'd like to speak to in the few minutes that remain?
Well, I guess one thing that's been one of the most frustrating, disappointing aspects of this campaign is that there's still probably a majority of people don't even know that I'm on the ballot yet. And I was not invited to the last 3 debates because I didn't poll the numbers. But when some of those pollings were done without my name mentioned. And so the fact that people don't know that there's a third person, they're not gonna poll for me. So that's been and the fact that, I mean, Paul LePage and Janet Mills are in the paper every day about an issue. Well, I'm never called about those. Nobody contacts me to get my opinion, and it just seems like it's very undemocratic. It feels like the system is rigged against independents. And so that's been a really frustrating thing that I've been dealing with. I think you were generous enough to do this today because you felt that, that wasn't fair either. That I've done far more work and I put more hours into this campaign than the two of them probably together, put together. And I've been on the road. I mean, I was just on the road. I went up to Calais and Machias, went to WCCC and UMN yesterday. And I went to Indian Township. There was no camera following me. So the media just hasn't been on board. And so I think the media is kind of rigged against the third. So that would be an issue that I hope can change. And I'm hoping that, I know I'm a long shot, but never forget, election day is a full moon and a lunar eclipse. So you never know what might happen.
Yeah. Well said. And I think that you're appearing on this show really will make a difference. You have a lot of very sincere thoughts and priorities that I think resonate with people. And you're right. I was one of those people that got to know you the hard way by calling you and indicating that on our debate, because of the polling, you weren't to be included. That was a hard call for me to make, particularly having had a conversation with you on 2 or 3 previous occasions and knowing that you had something to say and it came from the heart. And that means a lot. So I want to be able to provide you the opportunity that we've given you today and hope that people will see it and they'll take your candidacy at heart and know that you are sincere. And when they hear you, they'll know you are sincere. That is for sure. So Sam, it's been a pleasure to get to know you. And I hope this over time our acquaintance will continue. And I can't wait to go to Beals to have lunch with you at some time and follow your career, whether it's here in government, politics, or whatever it may be. You have a lot to offer, and I hope that you realize that in whatever happens on Tuesday, that you not give up the good fight. So thank you, but don't leave just yet. We're going to wrap up the show, and again, I just want to thank you on behalf of the chamber and the 3 of us. And certainly on behalf of myself as part of that 3 to say thank you. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and hope that we'll stay in touch as the future unfolds. So
I hope that happens too. And thank you very much.
Yeah. Well, as we reflect on today, it's pretty clear that when you come out of a small town, Maine is the size of rest of New England combined. And we sometimes forget that. It's big state, a lot of small communities. I came from a small community, not unlike Beals, 100 in my high school, not my high school class, but the entire high school, 22 in my class. And it's hard to get the word out, but the challenges of the Sam Hunklers of our state seeking higher elected office is difficult. First of all, Sam's a great guy. He's got a big heart, somebody you'd love to have lunch with and get to know even better. He's had a distinguished career in public service. No question. He may not have a specific platform, but he has priorities. He possesses passion and purpose. And he's running because he wants to make a difference. As he said it on the show, there's a different way to do things. I want to be part of that. I want to bring people together. I'm frustrated by the way things are in the state. And he went out by himself and collected 4,000 signatures to put his name on the ballot as an independent. So why isn't his candidacy catching fire with the things that he said and what he stands for? Why is it an uphill battle for him? Well, one could say perhaps he has no party behind him. He's an independent. Maybe that makes a difference. But we've had Senator Angus King became governor as an independent, still considers himself and is an independent. James Longley became our governor as an independent, and Elliott Cutler almost became our governor in his initial run. So I'm not sure it's that. It's a factor. I'm sure when you have a party, you have a base that works hard for you, and we've seen it. But no, he's running up against both experience and exposure. Let me explain what I mean by that. Experience. He came out of a very distinguished career, I've already mentioned that, with no experience in government or politics. Does that matter? Well, it maybe shouldn't, but it really does in making people aware, understanding what takes place, how things may work or not work. Yeah, it makes a difference. And particularly it makes a difference when you're up against, let's call them two giants that are well known that are sparring at the current time. You've got former Governor Paul LePage, who had 8 years in the office, took a hiatus, is now coming back, as we've all seen and read and seen ads and understand it to be, against Janet Mills, who is finishing her first 4-year term and seeks another. That's tough because they're in the paper, they've had experience. Janet Mills was a legislator, she was a district attorney, attorney general, distinguished career in government and politics. The same can be said of Paul LePage. 8 years as governor, before that as mayor and a businessman. Yeah, it does make a difference. That experience does make a difference, but so does an exposure. I mean, they have the exposure because of their position. Certainly, Sam does not, has not, but that doesn't mean he doesn't have a place or a part or a role to play in government. He most certainly does, but he's up against a fundamental issue that, even though we don't like it, it's part of the elective system, and that is money. I just read today in the Portland Press Herald that our two candidates for Democrat and Republican, Governor Mills and Governor LePage, total have $23 million that have been raised as this program takes place with a week to go. Sam has limited himself to $5,000 not to exceed. No campaign staff, no other than a stand up with Sam2022.com, a website and name card, and himself as the entire campaign staff. Sure, his family and people he's picking up along the way, but that's pale compared to the campaign for the other two candidates. And as he said, and we were part of that, is that if you're not polling well, you're not going to get on television to debate. That puts you at a disadvantage. Not money for ads puts you at a disadvantage. However, they're so divisive these days that maybe it does and maybe it doesn't. The point of the matter is, it's tough when you come from a community, a small community and part of the state without government, without experience or political experience, or without those dollars that can put your face and your voice out there. It's very difficult to break through that. Yep, it's difficult, it's expensive, It's time consuming. It's all of that and more. But in spite of that, for the Sam Hunklers out there, please do not stop trying. Yes, maybe you should run for the legislature representing your area. Maybe there's other elected positions you can begin to build that experience and portfolio, which we know is important. But for all else, do not let the fire in your belly be extinguished when it comes to public service. As I remember, as a younger person, the federal government had this promotion, I guess it's fair to call it a promotion. It certainly appeared in a lot of posters that said, Uncle Sam needs you. Well, to Sam Hunkler and everybody else out there that seeks to do what he very courageously has done, Maine needs you as well. That's the takeaway for this week. It is my pleasure to be able to join you this time and to be with you. And as we always say in closing out the program, be kind to yourself and be kind to one another. And with that, I thank you for being with us today. I look forward to seeing you right back here. As a matter of fact, next Tuesday, as we speak to that very important issue taking place in our state, a lot of controversy, a lot of misunderstanding. It's called PFAS, the forever chemical. Until then, have a great week.